So, on another news, I'm exploring this article from the Business of Fashion that says green brands have a head start on fashion's post-pandemic recovery. Coronavirus have forced the lockdowns. Giant brands such as Primark, H&M, Zara, to shut down thousands of stores and cancel orders worth millions of dollars. In the coming months, the fashion industry will face a very big shakeout that will put 80% of companies in Europe and in the US in financial distress, according to a McKinsey report that came out on April. Yet, one corner of the business is thriving, and this is the sustainable fashion business. Why? We have a statement from Cora Hills, founder and chief executive officer of Rev and Bert. This is a platform that sells luxury fashion focused on sustainability. She says, we are doing better this month than we did during Christmas. People are shopping more online and have more time to make conscious decisions. Our designers have greater control over the supply chain because it's very difficult to produce abroad and be sustainable. So there's an aspect here that's worth exploring, mentioning. It says higher prices and a smaller scale have traditionally kept sustainable fashion brands outside the mainstream, okay? Now, these same attributes might save them from the wave of consolidation or insolvencies that's coming for fast fashion and luxury household brands. What does this mean? High prices and smaller scale. This is how some sustainable fashion brands operate, because products are more expensive because they're sustainable. This doesn't mean all of the sustainable brands are expensive, okay? It just means that because the supply chain, because everything is done with much more care and more, the supply chain is traceable and everything is more local and everything is more clean, right? The prices go up. They don't mass produce. Okay, this means that their scale is smaller, meaning these brands that don't have the buying power as these huge companies, they cannot make $1 million orders, which is not a bad thing because those $1 million orders are made with very bad quality, in very precarious situations, from environmental aspects to social aspects, etc. So these two factors of higher prices and smaller scale are now benefiting social, sustainable, responsible brands because they can still produce more organically as opposed to bigger brands. What does this mean? They have the person that produces their cotton closer to them. They know that the person that produces buttons, they're still working or not. You know, the traceability, the transparency is all about that. Knowing that all of the elements that contain a piece of clothing, you know where they're coming from. And many of these big brands, they don't even know. They know where this, for example, is coming from, but they don't know where the elements come from. So these elements are giving an advantage to smaller companies that produce sustainable, responsible fashion. Also because it says that large retailers source textiles to third parties in developing nations such as China, Vietnam, or Bangladesh. And a designer, it says Kirsi Niinimäki, a designer professor at Aalto University in Finland, says these elements are often made by underpaid workers operating old energy-intensive machinery treated with polluting chemicals banned in developed countries. So we have another issue over here. We wear things that are made with chemicals that are banned in this country, for example. So when you have a supply chain and the capability of traceability, of knowing that you have organic cotton and is certified, or that you're recycling from this and that material, when you know all of this, then you choose not to buy from a factory that's using chemicals that are not only harmful for the people that wear the clothes, but also harmful for the workers that are handling these chemicals, right? She says that shorter supply chains allow for more transparency, and that for most brands, we still don't know where things are produced, using which chemicals and what waste comes out. That's quite problematic for the fashion industry in general. So Ninimaki co-authored a scientific review published in Nature earlier this year, showing that the sector produces about 20% of the world's waste water. 20% of the water that's polluted, it's produced by the fashion industry, all right? Mainly through treating or dyeing fabric. And the plastic microfibers used in many garments release the equivalent of 50 billion plastic bottles into the oceans each year. The rise of fast fashion, which depends on shoppers buying cheap items frequently, only makes things worse. At a time when even oil companies are trying to cut greenhouse gas emissions, those from the fashion industry are expected to surge by more than 50% by 2030. In 10 years, this is going to increase by 50%. The solution is to transition to a slow fashion model, which means that we buy in a different way, in every possible way. We buy out of a need instead of an impulse. We buy products that are responsible in different aspects, like that they don't come from animals, that they don't use chemicals, that they don't harm other people while doing these products. There's no child work involved, there's no etc. There's so many aspects to it, but that's what the slow fashion movement is about, right? The European Union is still drafting economic recovery plans, but policymakers in several nations are already calling for measures that push for shorter supply chains to ensure manufacturing of critical components in the region. Stimulus packages targeting local small and medium companies could disproportionately affect green fashion businesses, Ninimaki said, giving them a further leg up in the future economic recovery. She says that stimulus packages should be going to small companies who are operating in an ethical way. It would be good to assign funds to companies who are producing sustainably, employing teams of conscious and skilled workers, and are operating locally. So, what's happening right now with all this crisis? Companies, medium and bigger companies, are getting stimulus packages from the governments. But what she's saying is that we forget about the subcontractors, we forget about the micro businesses, we forget about the people that are informal, have informal jobs, like artisans, and a lot of these people that are not protected under these laws. they're not protected, and they should, because what they're doing is responsible in so many ways, right? They're contributing to their own little economies instead of making, two or three people at the top of the chain rich. No, these people, they bring back to their to their communities. Their work generates healthier conditions to live. They generate education in some cases. They're not harmful for the environment. They use the materials that they have around. This is locally producing. So they're asking for companies to fund all of these very, very small businesses. So the fashion industry really can transform, right? We've seen before in other crises that while the crisis lasts, our consumerism changes. One, because we are affected financially. The other, because it doesn't look so ethical that we're spending too much when there's a crisis going on. So we change our behavior. But it's also been seen that after the crisis, we start doing it all over again, right? We start with our same good old habits of consumption, and it really doesn't change much. Right now, I think we are in an era where I don't think, I know, and we all know that we are in an era of a climate crisis, and that is probably one of the imperatives, if not the biggest. So all of these things that have been the fashion industry has been asking, the sustainable fashion industry has been asking to change. Right now, in some cases it has changed, but what is being expected is that this behavior continues, right? One of the advantages of this behavior to continue is that, for example, we're not going to be shipping from the other side of the world garments that just shipping causes a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So imagine if really, as a practice, as a business model, we have these supply chains closer to us, then a lot of gas emissions would be reduced only from the shipping. So the article says that transparency is a very big struggle for the brands, which often don't know where their products are at any given time. Niall Murphy, the chief executive officer of Everything, that's a platform providing product tracing and analytics services to fashion firms, says that the pandemic exacerbated this problem, the transparency problem. Okay, if you don't know where your buttons are coming from, and you don't know if the factory that's producing those buttons is closed, then you have a big problem. But then you know about this problem way after you could do anything about it. Right? I mean, in as opposed to having a supply chain that's right here next to you, then you have control, because you always knew. You always had this information available to you. So this pandemic only exacerbated these issues. I've been mentioning this about this aspect that all of the problems that many companies were facing right now, they're in their faces. They're just, as bigger as ever. So among its conclusions from the McKinsey report, they said that the post-virus supply chains will have to shrink to avoid essential products being stranded for months in distant ports in case of a new virus outbreak or lockdowns. That should reduce emissions from transport and improve environmental control over factories. Most fashion brands are now completely paralyzed because of this, all of these lockdowns, and they're addressing these issues and fulfilling pre-pandemic environmental commitments will probably, that's the hope, become part of the strategic, of the strategy after economies and shops and everything else reopen. But some, because exactly what the pandemic is bringing, are being forced to do, right? So right now everything is at a halt. People are just trying to get through this, but this is a corrector for the industry that will push us to think differently. It will put sustainability on top of everyone's minds. Okay, there's these aspects also of wanting to have things that are made with material that it doesn't contaminate, that doesn't hold dirt. There's so many issues that the fashion industry right now has the opportunity to shift, and I think us as consumers are pushing in certain level to change this, because we are online, because we are taking care of a little, we're not consuming as an impulse. We are really spending our money, if we are spending money, on things that are more valuable in many aspects, not just going to the store and getting everything we can and then returning and then throwing away. Hopefully this is going to change.